utilizes neither federal nor a reserve, is created. It was planned at a secret meeting in 1910 on Jekyll Island in Georgia by a group of bankers and politicians, including Colonel House. And this transferred the power to create money from the Treasury of the United States government to a group of private bankers. It is probably the largest generator of debt in the world.
And we know from Isaiah 10, Micah 5, and several other passages that one of the key titles of the Antichrist is the Assyrian. The Assyrian.
We believe that the stage is being set for global tyranny. We're seeing the positioning going on that's going to make it very, very easy for a world dictator to take control of the structure. We know that Scripture describes just that, a world leader taking over a federation of global states.
Satan has 7 super kingdoms. In Revelation 12, verse 3, it says, "And there appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns." There it is again. "And 7 crowns upon his heads." Where on earth do we get 7 empires? Well, you see, we're familiar with Daniel's 4+1, but Daniel wrote in the days of Babylon. Prior to him, there were 2 major empires, Egypt and Assyria. And so if you take the 2 precedent, if you start from the beginning, there's Egypt, Assyria, then Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome in 2 phases. And so, and of course, the second phase of the Roman Empire having the 10 horns is well detailed in Daniel 2, 7, and 8, and we've looked at those passages. Now, don't let these last 5 confuse you, because again, it's Daniel's 4+1, if you will, Rome in 2 phases. Once you understand that, then everything starts to make some sense here. And most scholars recognize that the Roman Empire is, as I say, in 2 phases, what I'll call phase 1 and phase 2. Well, when you get to Revelation 17, it says, "And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space." Now, this is pretty straightforward. 5 are fallen. This is being penned by John. And behind him are 5 empires: Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece. That makes sense. There are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is. The one that's around right then, namely Rome. Paul was in exile on the island of Patmos when he was penning this from Rome. And the other is not yet come. Okay, that's the 7th. That's the last one. It's the phase 2 of Rome, if you will. It's the last one, sort of. "And when he cometh, he must continue a short space." Okay. The next verse, Revelation 17:11, "And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition." What on earth can that mean? Taken by itself, it sounds like it's contradictory. The beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. That passage has puzzled scholars for centuries. But in this background, let's take a look at this. The beast that was and is not, even he's the 8th. Well, that's the 11th horn of the final empire. He's the 8th, what I'll call the 11th horn. And he's of the 7. That means then he's somehow of the 7. But there's another clue here. It says that was and is not. Which of those 7 has disappeared from history? One of the great mysteries of archaeology is that there were many, many experts that didn't believe the story of Jonah because they didn't believe there ever existed a city called Nineveh. And it may astonish you to discover that they didn't know anything about it in an archaeological sense until the gold rush in California. Not that it had anything to do with it, I just mentioned that so you remember the date. In 1849, Layard was the committed person that made history by discovering Nineveh. Alexander the Great, Napoleon, many world conquerors walked over it not even knowing it was there because it was buried. And Layard, in 1849, discovered Nineveh. And today, it's well known. Of course, his discovery ushered in a craze in archaeology. in that whole region. But one of the mysteries about the Assyrian Empire is how it not only rose to power tremendously, but it disappears so quickly without a trace. Without a trace. And so it's interesting that there are vestiges of all the rest of these out here. Egypt's still around. Babylon in various forms has had different lives, if you will. Persia, Greece, Rome, of course, all visible. And so the speculation is that the beast that was and is not, even he's the eighth, but he is of the seven and goeth into perdition. Now, you say, gee, what on earth is this leading to? Well, let's take another look at a couple of other verses in the Scripture. Micah chapter 5 has something to say about this. It says, in this man shall be the peace. I think he's speaking of the Messiah, but then he goes, when the Assyrian shall come into our land, and when he shall tread in our palaces, then shall we rise against him 7 shepherds and 8 principal men. And they shall waste the land of Assyria with the sword, and the land of Nimrod in the entrances thereof. Thus shall he deliver us from the Assyrian when he cometh into our land, and when he treadeth within our borders. The Assyrian, the Assyria, the land of Nimrod. Do you pick up that? What on earth is Micah talking about? And that's what we're going to explore a little further. But I want you to notice something. In recent years, in 1906, Iran became an independent republic. From the old Roman Empire, these previously subsumed entities have reemerged. 1921, Afghanistan, 22, Egypt, 22, Iraq, 24, Turkey, 1930, Lebanon, 1938, Syria, 46, Jordan, 47, Pakistan, both Jordan and Pakistan being synthetic countries built to appease the Muslims, and 48, this nation Israel. It's interesting that in our recent history, all the pieces have resurfaced, perhaps to be recoalesced in this final super empire. Egypt, of course, was Ptolemy. Seleucus were the rest of these. Seleucus and Lysimachus, if you talk Turkey. But out of these, Iraq and Syria are those regions, those are the names by which they're known today, that way back constituted the empire known as Assyria, which incidentally was the place from which the first world dictator sprung. The first dictator, Nimrod, and perhaps the last will be an echo of that. And we'll take a look at that in our next session. Nimrod II, the 11th king.